First of all, I just want to say what an awesome panel that was just before, and I think it fits really well with this. So with no further ado, I'm David Schober. I'm the repository development team lead at Northwestern. I'm also the product owner of our repository and digital collections products at Northwestern. A lot of you have probably also heard me speak as product owner of Avalon Media Systems. I a couple of years ago peeled off of that role. Prior to coming to the library world, I manage web products for organizations like the Poetry Foundation, the American Academy of Pediatrics, and Rotary International. Our team currently focuses a lot of its attention on a preservation-first digital asset management system and repository called Meadow. Some of you have heard me talk in the past and have even brought it up and wondered out loud whether our approach to Agile and the way that we work is only possible because we're working on a greenfield application. But it's taken me a lot of thought, and I really think that our evolving Agile processes and us continually changing how we work is in fact the thing that brought our approach to or led us to a greenfield application. So I thought it might be kind of fun to talk about this. I also think maybe just take a pause here, and the title of this presentation might need a little bit of explanation, but I had the after lunch slot, so I thought it'd also be nice to have a little fun with the presentation. As you know, I talk a lot about Agile processes and what works and what doesn't, and why I believe that Agile methods are a way of not only make better software, but also better teams and probably in the long term, better people if you do it right. And one day I was talking to an old friend, and he's a fellow product owner at another organization, and he just flat out said he didn't think Agile worked anymore. And he talked about how his team was reporting out to him and how his bosses wanted to see kind of constant improvements in velocity and how everyone just seemed burned out. And immediately I quipped, Agile is whatever we made it to be. It's a paraphrase of an old paraphrase from a gentleman named Boone, who was the lead singer of a band called the Minutemen, California. He led that band until untimely death at 27, and it ended up on stickers and guitars, and it rolled around my head for a long time and really kind of shaped, I think, how I think about the world a lot. Side note, for those of you following along on Spotify, all these slide titles are in fact old Minutemen songs. Some reason my slides aren't advancing. One second. Here we go. All right, and just before I get started, I want to thank my team. At the end of the day, Agile is really about having a team willing to do the work necessary to continually improve. And I have a team that's always been willing and helpful and always puts a hand up. So we got Michael Klein as our technical lead, who you've heard speak just yesterday. Karen Shaw, Brendan Quinn, and Adam Arling and Matt Jordan run the front end side of things. And Veronica Robinson is our digital asset coordinator. Karen Shaw is also our Scrum lead, so she should rightfully take a lot of credit, I think, for the innovations over the last couple of years. For some of us that have been on Agile teams for a long time, it may be hard to remember why we started this in the first place. Agile was a response to the dominant trend in software and project management generally, of waterfall project management. This isn't meant really to be a history lesson on the history of project management, so I won't dig too deep. But for those of you that have never practiced it on a team, the main problem was one of overhead and assumptions. Basically, you broke a large project down into a series of phases, and each phase had to be completed and fed into the next phase. So you had a requirements phase, a systems design phase, an implementation phase, a formal testing phase, a formal deployment phase, and then a maintenance phase. And then if you needed to start something again, you had to restart and constitute a new project. Or as I like to think about it, or thought about it on the various waterfall teams I was on, you sat down and you tried to imagine everything you might ever need and write it down. And then you did what you wrote down. When you didn't get what you want, you pointed at the document, and then you repeated the process over. At the end of the day, it led to a lot of frustration for developers, for managers, for the people using the software. And we ended up with very rigid processes that just didn't feel right. So in the very early 2000s, a group of people got together, software developers got together, and in reaction to this said, we know what we're doing. And so the Agile Manifesto is really a simple set of principles that said, hey, we know what we're doing, so let us build the software. Tell us what we want to build and let us get to work. And really it came down to a set of 4 basic principles: that individuals and interactions mattered more than processes and tools. Working software mattered more than comprehensive documentation. customer collaborations and working with people mattered more than contract negotiation. And finally, responding to change trumped following a plan. So this little Agile manifesto really resounded with me in part because I was in my high school years, was an old punk rock kid, and it sounded a lot like what we thought about and what we talked about. So back in those days, we used to say small was far better than big and expensive. That people dancing on a floor were just as important, maybe more important than the band that was playing. And sometimes things got really confusing, but you just worked it out in the end. And you never knew exactly when someone was going to jump on stage and knock over a drummer. So the core principles were very reasonable, and a lot of people really felt, I think, and myself included, that this was the right way to move forward. And like a lot of things that resound with people, an industry was built around it pretty quick, because people, again, were looking for a way to solve a project management problem, a simple way. So I read, and out of that, basically, we ended up with a lot of books and a lot of documentation about the proper way to run an Agile team. And I don't mean to be hard on any of these books. I've read a lot of them. There's a lot of great ideas in them. But at the end of the day, a lot of people ended up feeling is that if things weren't working out exactly right, it was probably a problem of the methodology or their team, rather than the fact that the specific parts within this methodology, maybe they just needed to flex more and go back to the core. So for the next few slides, I'm going to talk about how Northwestern has settled into an Agile practice that I think really works for us. I'm not going to say it's the right way to do it for everybody. And I'm going to focus on the team a lot because, again, I think that that's at the core of all these principles, is that the team matters more than the process, and the process needs to flex around the team in order to make the team most effective. So the first, and I don't think there's going to be anything earth-shattering here, but we have about we break our work up into 8 to 10 week cycles. And we do that because it's a very sort of human way to think about work and to think about calendars. And each of those cycles we break up into 2-week sprints. We do retros all of the time at the end of every 2-week sprint. There's a big demo at the end, but we release all the time and we show things all the time and do mini demos all the time. Then we have something called a spin down for experiments. That's sort of the general framework. But right now I want to unpack at least the cycle just a little bit. Originally, we started with really short cycles, around 4 weeks. And that really worked and allowed us to move really quick through a lot of different experiments and concepts when we're moving early on. But we expanded it out to around 8 to 10 weeks just because it really allowed us to sort of stretch out a little more and build out what we were doing. At the beginning of every cycle, we spend a good week talking through what we want to get done. And the goal of that is to come up with a paragraph, which you see over here on the right, that in very human terms talks about what we're going to do. And we all talk about that paragraph all the time. So at the beginning of every sprint, we sit down and we say, what are we trying to do this cycle again? And we read it out loud. We make tweaks to it. And we get to work. I also use that paragraph to explain to Carolyn, my boss, what we're going to be working on for the week. So everybody really is literally on the same page. And then outside of that, we then break our work out into really just a simple bulleted list. We don't go through the formal process of sort of having feature epics with formal issues through it at this point. We just write a big list of what we want to do, because lists can move. People don't get as attached to lists, I think, as they do with a formal process of epics. Talk a little bit about the issues themselves. So after we've set up and organized what we want to get done in the cycle, we have to issue out our work. And our issues are purposefully lightweight. We all write them. It's not just a product owner's job. It's not just a service owner's job. Every developer on the team writes them, and they expand or shrink depending on what it is that the issue is describing. So our goal is to always have these issues be as small as simply written as they can be. Sometimes they need to be a full spec. Other times it needs to be a screenshot with a big red arrow that says do this thing. And again, the goal is never to fall into a formality about what an issue is with a formal done looks like even. I mean, we tend to put a couple of checkboxes to say done looks like, but those themselves are fairly informal. On complex problems that we can't describe easily in an issue, we sometimes have a fairly short issue that describes the problem and put the entire team on it. And I've been really a big proponent too of even budgeting points around that, just to get a rough estimate for what we're talking about. And this final part, I think is maybe the most important thing to remember. And this really even goes back to my friend's criticism of Agile, is that points aren't for the management. They never were supposed to be. Points are about the team communicating with each other about relative complexity of work so that we can guess what we might be able to get done. And that's really all that they were ever supposed to be. And the second that they became a measurable tool with which to push the team farther, I think something went terribly wrong. So that is something that I'm fairly serious about. Points are really about the team. It's about us communicating with each other so that we can make sure we're moving in the right direction. And if things get too complex, they also act as a nice beacon. This final part, or the last step, and this again is just normal Scrum and Agile, I think, but and I heard a lot of great talk about how important retros were in the last talk as well. So how we handle them is sometimes maybe a little bit different. Retros are critical. I mean, retros work only when the team makes them work. So I have been on other teams where retros, got very stale and very boring, and people were checked out. So the next part is having great Scrum lead matters. So if things aren't working right, it's important for the manager on the team, product owner, to talk to the Scrum lead and figure out where we can change things. Small actionable items really are critical. So out of our retros, we're always trying to get small actionable items, and then we experiment and even retro the retro, as it were. One thing that's really come out is we've started to pass around the person that leads the retro. It acts as a way, or the person that coordinates and leads the retro, it really acts as a way to protect against that the rest of the team sort of checks out and people are listening, or people are just going through the steps. When you know that you have to come up with a fun and creative retro and lead it, you know how hard it is. And you're also much more willing, I think, to never just sort of back down and check out. So we've done everything from plus deltas to column-based games, which a lot of folks have done. We've written personal readmes and shared them with each other as if we were pieces of software code. We've done like pick the movie sprints, pick the sprint that the movie most felt like, which is a really fun one. We even did like an online escape room game that maybe taught us a little bit about how we worked with each other in a way that we didn't expect. So again, it speaks back to just like look for ways to have fun with this and for ways to shake it up when things feel a little stale. And it's really important, I think, that the team owns the retro. That's the little bullet here about that they kick me out if they kick me out if they need to. So I'm a product owner, but I'm also a manager, which in formal Scrum never happens, but in everyday life happens all of the time. So I early on had told my team that that it's really important for them to feel like if they don't want me there for whatever reason, because they need to hash something out, they can kick me out and there's no feelings about it. And they've done it many times. And often they come back with something to me. They don't tell me what happened. It goes anyway. It's really a matter of building trust too. So I feel that is a critical trust building exercise, to know that the manager doesn't have to be in the room if you are the PO and manager type of person. The last one here is that you have to resist the belief that you're going, or resist the urge to retro all of the things. Sometimes people need to declare error, and that's okay, but it's really important, I think, to keep retros fairly scoped. We do a lot of performing, and I call it performing on purpose. We do a lot of demos, and this sort of goes from the smallest type of demo we do to the largest. Throughout our sprints, we picked up this concept of shoulder taps. I don't remember who on the team originally called it out, but it was this idea. It's a way for us to share information mid-sprint with a mini demo. So it happens usually after stand-up, and anybody on the team has the ability to call out anybody else and just ask them to show what they're working on midstream. The idea there is that it's a way to share out information and even like get feedback from people before you're done. It's a little different than pairing, which we do a lot of pairing as well. So it's more sort of cross-functional sharing. We do team demos at the end of every sprint. These we've turned into a non-public demo, and that was on purpose because we found we were spending a lot of time trying to create a great demo. So our 2-week demos are small and informal and just the team. We do regular hallway demos with people who ask for features or who we need input on features to keep that feedback loop very tight. We also do regular demos and training. So that's more formal and how our software works or how patrons can use our software. And then the final one, and this is, I think unique to, at least I haven't worked on a team that's done this. We do large formal public demos at the end of every cycle. So these last about an hour. We pick one person from the team to do it. It gives them experience both presenting if they haven't done that before, but it also really formalizes the story of our product over time. So these are recorded. We invite everybody from the library, and we have a pretty regular, folks come regularly. Around 50 people or so have been coming pretty regularly for a couple of years now. And the final bit that that we do at the end of every cycle is we take a full 2 weeks and we spin down. And at first this sounded really scary to a lot of people, or to myself even, like, how are we going to get all the work done? There's always too much work to do. But this unstructured time allows the team to not only take a breather from the sort of formal grind of a sprint, but it also allows them to fill in with personal training, fun experiments, like playing and exercising out an idea that they just didn't feel like was worth even putting together into a real formal issue. And at the end, we demonstrate. Even if it's just a little bit of training that you've done, you sort of talk through the book you read. And we found this unstructured time is really critical to both how we work and critical to our innovation. Sort of like our own little Bell Labs, I think of it as. Spin downs, like I said, we're not structured, but we've out of them have come some of our real big ideas, things like serverless IIIF. We've been working on a color searching aggregation experiment, so ways to do color, use color as a search tool itself, like the actual color. Preservation step functions, which we've presented on before. Bloom, which was our IIIF slider, we call it IIIF slider, it's which Matt Jordan has experimented on. I believe Valkyrie Shine came out of one of those, but I had to verify that with Brendan. And DevStack has came out of that as well, which we've since moved on from. All right, so I'm at time, so I'll run through this real quick. I'm not going to say that we've figured it all out. In fact, that's my whole point, is that there isn't really a way to figure it all out. I think that ultimately what you have to do is just radically trust your team, and then technology will transform itself, right? Process changes the tech and vice versa, and these things are constantly in interplay. We also found at Northwestern that a really cool part of this was that the team itself got bigger. So before we thought of the dev team as our team, and this really allowed us, in particular because of demos and a lot of hallway conversations, to grow what that team meant and was. You also, I think, have to meet the team where they are, not where you want them to be. And this kind of falls into the next one, which is that every structural change means you have a new team. So if you're leading up a team, when you add a new player or when someone leaves, you now have a new team. So it's really important, I think, to check in and figure out if your processes are still working. And ultimately, when the team really feels trusted, they're going to tell you when things aren't working. And the final bit is when things get stale, shake them up a little bit. Maybe someone will fall into a drummer, because that always helps shake things up. And that's it. That's what I got today. Some of our repos are here. I didn't want to go too deep into each of our repos, but I don't know if I have any time for questions, maybe 1 minute, but I'm happy to answer them asynchronously if not.
Yeah, you have a minute. I think we can take an extra minute or two.
Sure. Are they in Q&A, or I see the channel going?
There's a lot of
Q&A. Okay, I'll just try to scan real quick.
David, did you talk about the experimentation? I know you kind of mentioned the spin downs, but did you give the example? I kind of missed it.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah, that many of our innovations came right out of those spin downs that were very unstructured in nature at the beginning and then built up. If there's a question, somebody you want to put it right now in one of the QAs if they can? I'm sorry, there's a lot of chatter, so it's hard to see if there's a question. Instead of points, 1 to 2 days. Yes, Jonathan.
Anna asked a question. Do you see it? What happens if at the end of the cycle you don't finish the tickets?
I see one from Tim real quick that just popped into Q&A. How do people balance multiple projects in a small team? For us, we've slowly focused more and more of our attention on one big project. that was in part on purpose, but we still have multiple repositories. And I think in part, we stopped thinking about projects. And I know it's going to sound weird, but we think of the repositories as a large product with a lot of interconnecting parts. So I think that was really a shift for me, and I think the team, is that what we're really doing is running and moving products forward. And at any given time, we might want to lean into one product or another. I don't know if that made sense. It sounded a little fuzzy, but I think there's a nuanced difference between a project, which has a start and a finish, and running products, which you're constantly trying to improve and sell to your internal clients.
And David, will you answer Anna's?
Which one?
Anna had a question.
yes.
What happens if at the end of a cycle you didn't finish the ticket?
We talk about it a little bit, and then we carry them over to the next cycle. If it's like an obvious trend, then we start asking, like, what are we missing? Do we need to learn more about something? And often, I think more often than not, that's what happens. So like if we jumped into, I'm just going to throw out, like if we jumped into step functions and we thought it was going to be a fairly straightforward transition of some of our code over to step functions, and it became way bigger than we expected in the middle of it, we might pause and say, is it that we don't know enough? So then we'll write new tickets and we'll break it up differently. And we'll write new tickets about what we need to learn. Does that get at the heart of what you're asking about?